You take too long to decide. Even simple choices feel heavier than they should. You go back and forth. You imagine outcomes. You wait for clarity that never fully comes. And eventually, you either delay the decision or make it and still feel unsure. So it starts to feel like a flaw. Why can't I just choose? But what if the problem isn't indecision? What if it's something your brain is trying very carefully to avoid? Problem deep dive. It shows up in everyday moments. Choosing a career direction, responding to a message, making a commitment. Even small decisions can stretch longer than expected. You think it through, then think again. You imagine how each option might play out. You picture the future, not clearly, but in fragments. And in almost every version, there's something that could go wrong. So you hesitate, because no option feels completely safe. And the longer you stay in that space, the more uncertain everything becomes, even things you were once sure about. This starts affecting how you see yourself. You might call yourself indecisive, overthinking, unable to commit. But internally, it feels different. It feels like responsibility, like you're trying to choose correctly, to avoid making a mistake that could affect your future. And that pressure builds quietly, because the more important the decision feels, the more you try to get it right, until eventually, doing nothing starts to feel safer than choosing something. So the question becomes, why does choosing feel so risky even when the stakes aren't that high? 3. Reframe. It's not that you can't decide. It's that your brain is trying to protect you from something very specific. Not failure, not uncertainty, but regret. Because regret isn't just a thought. It's an emotional experience your brain wants to avoid before it even happens. So instead of waiting to feel regret later, your brain simulates it now, quietly, in the background. And that simulation shapes your decisions. Which means your indecision isn't a lack of clarity, it's a response to something your brain is already imagining. But how can your brain feel something that hasn't even happened yet? 4. Psychological mechanism. This comes from a process called affective forecasting. Your brain constantly predicts what future outcomes will feel. It doesn't just think about what will happen, it tries to feel it in advance. This involves areas like the prefrontal cortex, which simulates scenarios, and the amygdala, which attaches emotional weight to those simulations. So when you face a decision, your brain runs multiple future versions. In one, things go well. In another, they don't. But here's the key detail. Negative outcomes carry more weight because the brain is biased towards avoiding loss. This is known as loss aversion. So even if a positive outcome is likely, your brain focuses more on the possibility of regret. Here's the mental model. Imagine standing at a crossroads. Each path leads somewhere unknown. But instead of just seeing the paths, your brain projects emotional echoes from the future. On one path, you feel relief. On another, disappointment. And the disappointment feels stronger, so you hesitate. Not because you don't know what to choose, but because you've already felt a version of getting it wrong. That's why decisions feel heavy. You're not choosing between options. You're choosing between emotional predictions. And the one you're trying hardest to avoid is regret. But this creates a problem, because the more you try to avoid regret, the harder it becomes to decide at all. 5. Practical framework. You don't solve this by finding the perfect choice. You shift how your brain relates to the possibility of regret. 1. Separate outcome from identity. One reason regret feels so intense is because it doesn't stay attached to the decision, it attaches to you. What to do? Remind yourself, this decision is an outcome, not a definition. Why it works? This reduces identity-based threat processing in the prefrontal cortex. The brain becomes less defensive when identity isn't at stake. Real-life example. Instead of thinking, if this goes wrong, it means I'm bad at choosing, you think, it just means this outcome didn't work. The emotional weight drops. 2. Limit future simulation time. Your brain wants to explore every possibility, but more simulation doesn't lead to clarity. It leads to overwhelm. What to do? Give yourself a fixed time to think, then stop. Why it works. This reduces cognitive overload and prevents excessive emotional forecasting. It interrupts the loop between imagination and anxiety. Real-life example. You set 20 minutes to consider a decision. After that, you choose based on what you know, not what you might know. 3. Normalize the presence of regret. Right now, your brain treats regret as something that must be avoided completely. But that's not realistic. What to do? Accept that some level of regret is part of any meaningful choice. Why it works. This reduces avoidance behavior driven by emotional threat sensitivity. The brain stops treating regret as danger. Real-life example. You choose one path, knowing another path might have worked too. And instead of resisting that thought, you allow it to exist. 4. Focus on direction, not perfection. Your brain is trying to optimize the outcome, but most decisions don't have one perfect answer. What to do? Shift your focus from right choice to forward movement. Why it works. This activates goal-directed behavior instead of fear-based avoidance. It moves processing away from fear-based circuits. Real-life example. Instead of asking, what's the best option, you ask, which option moves me forward right now? The decision becomes simpler. 5. Build trust through small decisions. Right now, your brain doesn't fully trust your decision-making, so it overcompensates. What to do? Make smaller decisions more quickly, without overthinking. Why it works. Repeated action builds confidence through reinforcement learning. Your brain learns that decisions don't always lead to harm. Real-life example. You choose small things, what to eat, what to watch, without analyzing them. Over time, your tolerance for uncertainty increases. 6. Integration. At its core, this isn't about indecision. It's about your relationship to the future. Your brain is trying to protect you from feeling something painful later, so it brings that feeling into the present and asks you to solve it now. But the future can't be fully predicted, and regret can't be completely avoided. So the loop continues until you shift one thing, not the decision itself, but how much power you give to imagined outcomes. Because when you stop trying to eliminate regret, you create space to actually choose. 7. Quiet, empowering close. You don't need certainty to move forward. You only need enough trust to take one step. Not because the step is perfect, because staying still isn't neutral. It's a choice too. And maybe that's the quiet truth behind all of this. You're not afraid of choosing. You're afraid of feeling like you chose wrong. But that feeling doesn't define you. It passes. It shifts, just like everything else. And when you start to see that, decisions become lighter. Not because they're easier, but because you're no longer trying to control what can't be fully known. And that's where movement begins.